Hi everyone, so tonight I don't really know what we're making. I just want to show you some cool things that you can do with shape layers and track mats and paths. So just follow along and we'll see what happens at the end. So I'm just going to make a new composition. I already have my folder structure set up and I'm just going to name this shape layers 1. And it's all the same thing that what we've been doing before. So 1920 by 1080, 30 frames per second in 2 seconds. I'm gonna click OK, and so now I have my first comp. The first thing I'm gonna do is draw a shape layer, just using this tool up here. So there we are, there's a square. And you can see that After Effects by default puts the anchor point in the center of the comp rather than in the center of the shape layer. And you can really easily get it to where you want it to be by holding Y on your keyboard and then Command. Nope. That's not how you do it. By holding Y and then click it and then Command. And it'll snap to where you want it to go. I don't know why that thing is popping up. So now my anchor point's in the center of my shape layer, which is what I want if I were going to use just our normal transform properties here. But what's cool about shape layers is it's separated into content groups, and with these content groups you have a lot more control over the layer than you would just like a normal imported Illustrator vector layer. So in these content groups, you can adjust things like the size, the position, the roundness of your shape layer or your rectangle layer. This isn't the same for if I were to draw this box with the pen tool, which I'll show you guys later. You can also adjust the stroke, so you can change the color. And then I don't have my strokes hidden right now, so I can unhide it and then that'll show up. You can also do that up here at the top. And in this area is where if I wanted my joins or my caps on my stroke to be round, that's where I would change it. You can do the width, the opacity of the stroke specifically. You can add dashes. So you can add like a few adjusted to how you want, and then this works the same way. I forget what, I think it's Illustrator that it works this way too. You can add more dashes and then adjust them that way. And all of these things are keyframeable too, so except adding. But like these, all adjustable. So now it starts off small and then it gets bigger. And this is a really easy way, like if you wanted a marching ants sort of look. I'm gonna make the gap a little bigger. You could keyframe the offset section here and that'll just move it around. So that looks weird because it happens really fast, but now you can see that just the path is just sort of going around this box. I'm gonna get rid of that. This is also new. I don't really know how to use this part, but I'm gonna get rid of my dashes. And I think it's so you can taper the ends of your strokes. Yeah, so you can see that. That's pretty cool. That's new. I don't know how to use that, so I'm gonna not talk about it. This is also new. Wow. Okay, I don't know how to use those, so I'm not gonna talk about them, but you can do that if you want. You can also adjust the fill sort of the same way. You can change the color here, and that changes it up here too. You can change the opacity of just the fill. And then you can transform just this shape layer inside of the whole content group. So I am going to add another rectangle to this content group just so you can see what I mean. So now that I have two rectangles in, I'm just going to use this transform tool and move the position over so I can see it. And now I'm gonna move my keyframe or my anchor point to the middle of the shape layer and align it to the center so you can see what's happening. And what's cool about this is, so let's say I wanted this second rectangle to sort of be like spinning. So I'm going to do that on rotation, not position. I want it to be spinning like this while this whole shape layer is moving. So that looks really dumb, but you can see how something like this can come in handy. I'm gonna get rid of those keyframes. And what's also cool about this is, so I have two rectangles. They each have their own stroke and they each have their own fill. So if I were to scale this rectangle down, you can see that the stroke is also affected. The stroke scales down with the shape layer. But if I don't want that to happen, I can just take this stroke and move it outside of this content group and below the two rectangles. I'm going to hide this stroke, and there's still a stroke around it because this is affecting both these layers. So After Effects runs on JavaScript, and it sort of works the same way as Java does, so it reads from top to bottom. So if I were to move the stroke in between these two layers, it's not registering the stroke on the second shape layer. So now if I wanted to scale, that's skew, if I wanted to scale the square, the stroke stays the same, which is really helpful because I feel like a lot of people don't know that you can do this. It really comes in handy. Okay, so I'm just gonna delete these and let's try to make something. I am just going to get my rectangle tool and I'm gonna pull out my proportional grid just so I'm seeing what I can do. I'm gonna get my ruler out by just clicking Command R, and I'm gonna pull some guides in, so when I draw, this will snap to the guide. Snap to guides. Lock guides. Okay. So I have my little shape layer. I'm gonna go up here and use the pan behind tool because for some reason when I click Y, that dialog box pops up. But so I'm going to use my pan behind tool and move the anchor point by holding Command to get it to snap to the center of my shape layer. Switch back to my selection tool and it should, since I have lock guides on and two guides there, lock into place. Yeah, that's what I want. Okay. Something else that you can do with shape layers is they have this thing called a repeater. There's a lot of different things that you can use by clicking this little add tool that affect the shape layer. So I'm just going to use the repeater right now. And as you can see, I have 3 more copies of my shape layer. And I want them to sort of like line up with these green lines all the way to the end. So I'm just gonna, in here, so I twirled down the repeater, transform repeater 1. In position, I'm just gonna move it until they're where I want them to be. And then I'm gonna make some copies until it's all the way to the end. And so now I have, these shape layers that are just, that it's really just one shape layer, which keeps your file size down quite a bit and speeds up rendering quite a bit. What's cool about that is now I can also add another repeater. And since it is reading from top to bottom, so now this repeater is affecting both of these layers, I can make it come down. So I'm going to put my grid back on. And so now I have this grid of squares that is just one shape layer as opposed to whatever 15 times 8 is. So now I can add something like this wiggle transform, and I'm going to move it below these two. So now it's affecting everything in this content group. And what a wiggle transform does, it does kind of exactly what it sounds like. So I'm going to just want each of these to sort of like scale up differently just for like an ambient background. So I'm just going to change the scale here to 50. And you can see that that already adjusted everything. And for something like this, you don't need to keyframe it because it's basically just an expression in disguise as an effector. So it's just going automatically when I play. Great, that's exactly what I want. And here you can adjust like how fast it goes. So if you wanted something a little bit crazier, it's obviously pretty easy to do, but I want something a little bit more ambient. So I'm gonna keep it like that. You can also add something like pucker and bloat, which you can see that just made them a little bit bloated. But you can get something really cute or weird looking depending on how you play with it. I like the flowers. So now I have this cute little flower grid. And so when I twirl this down, if I wanted these to sort of scale in and out, not scale, if I wanted the opacity to change, so like some of them are brighter than others, you can't do that with a wiggle transform, right? So, and you can't, so like if I were to twirl this down and just change the opacity here, that affects it for all of them, right? So I don't want to do that. So what I do is I have a hack way to do it. And it involves using something called a track matte. So how I usually do it is I go up to Layer, New, Solid, click OK until I have, it doesn't matter what color it is, until I have a white solid, and then I pull up my effects and presets, and I type in turbulent noise, and I drag that effect to this layer, and that gives me this weird cloudy looking thing. And what I want is I want this contrast to be really high, so I'm just gonna make it 1000. And so now I have like this crunchy looking cloudy thing. But I am going to add the mosaic effect to it, which will make it square. And then I'm going to check sharp colors And I'm going to change this to 16 by 9 because then that will match my proportional grid. And actually, so these are on the corners. So I'm actually just going to move this so it's more in the center. It's going to bug me that it's not exactly the center, but it doesn't really matter for this. And then just repeat one more time on each of these to get, woo, I just hit my microphone, sorry. I'm just gonna repeat it one more time. Great, so now there's sort of like this box over top each one of these. So with this layer turned on, I'm gonna click toggle switches and modes until I see track matte. And I'm gonna go down here and I'm going to change it to Illumimatte. And now you can see that some of these are different opacities than others. So if I had a background layer, you'll be able to see that it's affecting opacity and not just grayscale. That's hard to look at. But it's not changing. So this, when I turn this layer back on, you can see that this is just staying still. And it's really easy to animate, just like everything else. I'm just gonna, in this evolution section here, I'm just gonna have it start at 0 and then go 1 rotation. And so now this is moving. And when I turn off this layer and I still have my Illumimatte on, you can see that that's affecting and making it sort of twinkle a little bit. So that's something that I actually use a lot. A lot of projects I do, they need mortises. So that's just like simple animated backgrounds, and this comes in handy for something like that. Okay, so now that I have this background animation, I want to add some type to it. An easy way to do that is just to select my layer. With the rectangle tool selected, I'm going to change it from tool creates shape to tool creates mask up at the top. And again, with my shape layer selected, I'm just going to draw on the area that I want to mask out. And since I want it to be opposite of this, I'm just going to change it down here from add to subtract. When you draw a mask, this should automatically pop up. If it didn't, you can twirl down your shape layer and under masks, it should all be there. So great. Now that I have what I want, that works perfectly fine if I don't want this shape layer to move. So let's say I also want this shape layer to be moving upwards. Like this. You can see that a few things wrong are happening. One, the mask is moving with the shape layer when I just want the mask to stay the same. I'm gonna put some type in the middle of this so you can see what I mean. So obviously I want that mask to stay in position and just the background to move. Two, you can see that like here when I turn off the grid, our matte is messing up how these flowers look, which we don't want either. We want it to stay consistent. So that's easy. I'm just going to parent this layer to, so I'm going to parent my track mat to my shape layer. So when it moves up, the mat moves with it. So that fixed one thing, but now I'm gonna hide this hello and we're gonna focus on just adding more copies into this repeater so it expands all the way down, so it just doesn't go off screen. I just want it to be like a continuous flow of flowers. So in my shape layer, in my content group, I'm just gonna add more copies to the bottom. I think that'll be enough. But now, since my track mat doesn't expand further down, I can't see those copies that I made. So a really good effect to know when you're in a bind like this is called repeat tile, CC repeat tile. I'm gonna click that, I'm gonna drag it to this layer, I'm gonna open it up so I can see. And this is a really good effect because it makes something like this way easier than trying to have to just like make the whole layer bigger. I'm just going to expand this down, and it's really that easy that I can just expand my layer down. So now I have a mat that expands all the way down and moves with my shape layer. So I'm going to hide it. And so now that I have this, but the next problem is the mat is still moving with the type. So to fix that, I'm just going to delete the mask from this shape layer. And I'm just going to draw another layer on, and this one is I'm going to use as another track mat. So I'm going to pull up my proportional grid, put my mat as a shape layer in the same spot that I want it. Great, so that's what I want my mask, where I want my mask to be. But since this layer already has a track mat, using it the traditional way, I don't know what I just did. I didn't do anything. Since this layer already has a track mat this way, I can't make this one a track mat too. It's either one or the other. But what I can do is I can hide that layer, and back in my effects and presets, I can type in set mat. And I'm going to drag set mat onto this shape layer. And here I'm going to, so it says take mat from layer. I'm going to change it to, I want shape layer 2 to be my mat. So I'm going to change it to shape layer 2. And now I'm just going to invert, and now my mat is doing what I want it to do. This could also easily be done with just a box behind your type, but let's say we couldn't do that in this case. So now I have this beautiful composition of like this weird matrix flower thing that could have potentially been really difficult for me to make, but it was actually fairly simple. I just have 4 layers and really only one shape layer, which is that little flower thing all the way up there, just using different effectors to get the shape layer to do what I want. I recommend just sort of playing around with some of these other things that you can do in here. Like you can also add zigzag, and now it looks like some weird demon thing. And you can also move these around, and depending on where you put them, it will affect the layers differently. So like, you can get some weird things that way. Okay, so now that I have this animation done, I'm going to animate this type to do sort of like a fake 3D thing, but not using 3D layers, not using cinema, just animating the paths. So I'm actually going to change my word to something easier. I think this will be better. I'm gonna adjust my kerning because it looks terrible. Just to give me a little bit more space. That's a little better. And now I am going to right click on my type layer and click create shapes from text, and that will turn my text layer into a shape layer. I'm going to delete the old one because I don't need it anymore. And I'm going to twirl down my shape layer into my content groups, and you can see that each letter was expanded out into its own content group. And now I'm going to twirl down, and you can see that I have two paths for my P. I have the inner one and the outer one. And I'm just going to sort of like adjust these paths so they all meet in the center of the letter. And to do that, I'm first going to start by just making some guides like this in the center of my letter. And I'm just gonna use another shape layer to sort of get an approximate width of this P, because when they all meet in the center there, I want it to be this width approximately. So I'm just gonna use that, pull some guides in, and delete. So now that I have my guides, I'm going to, in this path, first I'm gonna focus on the outer one. So I'm just gonna hide that inner one right now. I'm gonna twirl down the P, and here you can see I have this path. And so I'm going to make a keyframe at the beginning, and then I'm going to go 1 second in and make another keyframe. And here is where I'm going to sort of drag these points in. So to select just one of these points, you can shift click and it'll give you all the Bezier curves, and you can just click again and select each one individually, and then hold shift to sort of get them to do what you want. I'm going to pull this in so it lines up there. Actually, I'm going to do these ones first. No, I'm not. I did it right the first time. So now I sort of have the beginning of what I want it to do. But this part is obviously not right. So I'm just going to use my Convert Vertex tool. So you can see it sort of looks like the P is turning backwards in space. And it's not a 3D layer. I didn't use 3D at all. It just looks 3D because of the way that the paths are moving. So now I'm going to do the same thing with this inner P. Cool, and I'm just gonna copy and paste that first keyframe and put it on the end. And I'm gonna adjust the easing so it looks better. This doesn't quite go all the way. So I'm just gonna use my arrow keys to adjust it. Yeah, that's better. Okay, so you can see that it sort of looks like it's turning back into itself. I'm going to do this with the rest of the letters. Okay, so I have all my paths animating, and it's not the best, but I'm gonna adjust the easing and hopefully that will disguise it a little bit. So I guess that's kind of cool, maybe. It's definitely interesting. And now for one last beautiful finishing touch, I'm going to show you how to do some trim path animations. So using my same grid as this box, actually I'm just going to use this box. I'm gonna copy and paste it because this one is the one that's my track mat and I don't want it to interfere with that. So I'm just gonna get rid of the fill and add a stroke. Let's make it red. And in this layer, I'm going to twirl down back into my contents groups until I have my rectangle path. And so there's things that you can do, like you can't adjust the path like we just did for the play in here because it just doesn't let you do that. You can right click on the rectangle path and you can click convert to Bezier path and then that will give you the same option. So now this isn't a rectangle anymore and I can't adjust the size, position, and roundness like I could before, but I can sort of animate this path on its own. And a few things about paths like this. So let's say I didn't want this to be connected down here. I can shift click and then click again on the anchor points I want. And I don't want these 2 points to be connected. So I'm going to select both those 2 points and I'm going to right click. I'm going to go to mask and shape path and I'm going to uncheck close. So now this path is open And that works if I were to just draw this with the pen tool too. So let's say I just do this weird shape and I want this to be closed. I can just click closed. And then I changed my mind and I want these to be open. That's really easy. But for now, I'm just gonna keep these closed. So I'm gonna select my 2 points. Also, something important to know is your first vertex. So right now, this is my first vertex, and I can tell it's my first vertex because it's bigger than all the other ones. It has sort of like this extra box around it. And that's important. So if I were to go into here and add my trim paths effector, that would start. Okay, so let me back up actually. So let's animate trim paths before I get to there. So it's really easy. It's what I just did in my content group with my rectangle 1 selected. I'm going to add trim paths and that'll pop up here. And it's really easy to animate depending on what you want it to do. Usually you just keyframe the end, go in, make another keyframe, and I want it to wipe off. Let's say I actually want it to do the opposite of that. Instead of just redoing it, I'm going to select both of these keyframes, right click on them, keyframe assistant, and time reverse keyframes, and that will switch them. So now it's drawing on instead of drawing off. So I'm going to copy that first keyframe and paste it on the end. So now this is what I have it doing. And so what's important going back now about the first vertex is this animation is starting at the first vertex. And let's say I don't want it to start there. I want it to start on this corner. I'm going to select this point. I'm going to right click, mask and shape path, and I'm going to go down to set first vertex. So now my animation is starting from that corner rather than the other corner. You can also keyframe the end at the same time. So let's say I just want this to be slightly offset. I'm going to make my keyframes the same. I'm going to select them all and just shift them forward by 5 frames. So now this is sort of chasing itself. And you can ease it just like you ease everything else. I'm gonna put those back so I can get that last one in. Easy ease. Let's make it slow in the middle, because why not? So now this is what it looks like. And I'm actually going to adjust these and make it half the time. So with all my keyframes selected, I'm going to click on the last ones and holding Alt, push them all in so it's half the time. And since that's chasing itself, I need to remember to offset so you can actually see what's happening. And now this is what I have. It's really something. But okay, so now instead of this sort of ending for the last half, instead of copying and pasting these keyframes, I'm going to teach you a very, very easy expression that, again, comes in handy and makes your workflow a lot easier. So, if you don't know what expressions are using code to animate. After Effects, like I said before, uses JavaScript or a version of JavaScript. And you can do so much with expressions. It makes a lot of things a lot easier, and it comes in handy when you're building toolkits for clients who need to crank out a bunch of things very quickly. You can automate things so they don't have to mess around. They can just sort of like plug and go. This expression, like I said, is really easy. To get your expressions up, I will do a video later that sort of dives deeper into this, but for now, I'm just going to teach you this one. So to use an expression, you Alt or Option click on the parameter that you want to write the expression in. That will pull up this dialog box. So this has one in it already. I'm just going to delete it because I don't need that. And I'm just going to type loop out and then add a semicolon at the end to end it. And I'm going to do the same thing in the end parameter too. So now it will loop this animation. But that's not exactly what I want it to look like, so I'm just going to adjust my keyframes to get them to do what I want. So in hindsight, this is just a bad example, and I'm just gonna get rid of the expression. But if you want it to do that, that's what you can do. I'm gonna just get rid of this one because that's what's making it look weird. And I'm getting this expression error because I still have the expression on this parameter even though nothing's happening, so I'm just gonna delete it and that will go away. So now I'm gonna change this to 0. I just have this line drawing on and I want it to draw on. And then instead of drawing off back the way it came from, I want it to go the other way. So I'm gonna make a keyframe on start and do it that way. So now this is what it's doing. I'm going to easy ease and adjust this back so it's slower. So now it's just going around in this circle. I'm not going to do that, ignore that. So that's how you use trim paths. If I had multiple paths being affected by this trim paths effector, so let's just add another one in this content group to just show. I'll do an underline. So now I have this underline, as well as this outline. I can move this trim paths outside of this content group and below both of these different layers. So now my trim paths is affecting both of these. Now in here, if I switch from simultaneously to individually, it will animate both lines separately. Sure, I guess that's what I was making this whole time. Okay, so now that I have this beautiful animation, I'm just gonna walk you guys through how to render one more time. This time I'm gonna do it from my render queue built into After Effects though. So I'm going to go to composition, add to render queue, and I'm gonna change this here. So I'm gonna click on lossless. Actually, let's make a template. So I'm gonna click this little arrow, go down to make template, and that will pull up this dialog box. And then I'm just gonna make this say ProRes, even though I already have one. I'm gonna go to edit, and that will pull up this output module settings. And the only thing you have to do is in format options. So click format options, go to animation, and then you can do ProRes 422, ProRes HQ, or Apple ProRes 444. I'm just gonna do ProRes 422, click OK. Click OK again. I'm gonna change this to 422 so I know which one it is. And then click OK. And then my preset pops up and I'll be able to use that. And so now it has the settings what I want. I'm gonna save it where I want. I'm gonna click render. And since that renders out an MOV file, I want it to actually be an MP4, so I'm opening up my media encoder queue, which will take a minute. And once this is open, I'm just gonna take this video, drag it in. This stuff should all be the same. H.264, match source, high bit rate. Render to my desktop, click play, and that will compress it to the right codec that we need. And now enjoy your lovely animation.